Welcome again. Many of you know Mr. Robert Bigelow as the space entrepreneur who has developed and is currently marketing his company's patented expandable space habitats as an alternative to the International Space Station. Bob Bigelow is, of course, the founder and president of Bigelow Aerospace. In a recent Aviation Week article, Mr. Bigelow was recognized as one of the few champions of commercial space activity. Bob's business activities over the past 4 decades have been focused on real estate development, as well as banking and finance. If this isn't enough to keep one person busy, he's also dedicated himself to revolutionizing space commerce. Please join me in welcoming Bob Bigelow.
Oh, okay, great, it's on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Janet. And thank you, Pat, for giving us this opportunity to give this talk. Good morning, everyone. I'm trying to maybe cause a stimulation here today, and some of what I say may be kind of controversial. And that's good. That's my objective. All right, so here we go. Get ready. Listen up. Because your space playbook is about to really change. There's a new gunslinger in Dodge, and he's huge. He's hungry. He's very wealthy. He's ambitious, like we used to be. That used to be us. Right? And he is not American. He has already started to play the game, and we are unaware. We don't even know what the game is. What is the game? The game is what I call solar system monopoly. This will characterize the 21st and 22nd centuries and beyond. The hell you say? Yes, I say, and if we ignore this, it shall be at our extreme peril. I will tell you now how the first major win of this game of solar system monopoly will end about 15 years from now, and who this gunslinger is. But first, over the next 5 years, America will struggle uncomfortably towards some politically acceptable level of economic recovery. However, I see it this way. With the passage of time over perhaps the last 20 years, not even including the additional serious damage caused by this Great Recession, America has become weaker, not stronger, vis-a-vis other countries, as measured against traditionally important criteria. So we must ask, where is America going? And for those of us that are space geeks, we must also ask, where is this planet's space future going? Who will be in charge as the dominant force leading the way? How different is America today from 1969? Educationally, financially, politically, industrially, and especially motivationally. Is America weaker or stronger in a global perspective? If America is a lot weaker than it was in 1969, relative to the above criteria, how close in years to the tipping point is America now to being relegated to the number 2 position across the board? Who would number 1 most likely be? Who? China. Then I don't have to say, we are probably thinking China, because that's what I wrote down here. So let's take stock of our situation. What are some serious American problems that are probably permanent? Probably permanent. The enormous cost of entitlement and welfare programs. The enormous cost and power of government unions at all levels of government that directly lead to those excessively fat and overindulgent employee retirement and benefit programs. the damaging growth and cost of the national debt, the embarrassingly poor quality and results of our public educational system, an increasing and significant cultural bias towards socialism, and a pathetic lack of truth, honesty, skills, and judgment in our government. Yes, there are other problems, but these are some of my favorites. Extrapolating from this, you probably do not get a future picture of large, ambitious American space budgets. And this is key. Another problem, of course, is that NASA is a shadow of the space agency it once was in the 1960s and 1970s. Those were great times, weren't they? I remember. What a difference. No, it is not a function of money. But that fits right in because America isn't the same country either, for many reasons, some of which I've already mentioned. Now you'll notice that these years pertain to the moon race and the lunar missions. America at that time had a national vision with real, honest-to-God motivation behind it. Fear. That was the motivation, fear. What were we afraid of? We were afraid of the Russian space program. Remember Sputnik? Remember that they were launching large masses far greater than we were? Really shocked us. So the fear was all about the Russian space program and their potential capabilities. But it produced in America sizzle, energy and ambition, creativity, motivation, and excitement with national pride at the core. I remember that really well. Georgy Arbatov, Soviet expert in the United States, said this at the end of the Cold War: "We are going to do a terrible thing to you. We're going to do a terrible thing to you. We are going to deprive you of an enemy." That's a stimulus. That's a very important stimulus. Now, here's the really bad news for America. Oh, I'm just a real fountain of joy here this morning. So here's the really bad news for America. China already has a grand national vision. Their vision is that China wants to be indisputably number one in the world, measured any way you want to measure, with the possible exception of freedom, and some would argue they have more freedom now than they have ever had. China's people are excited and proud to be Chinese. Their standard of living is moving dramatically up in awesome displays. Remember the 2000 Olympics? That display? Wow. That was the most fireworks I ever saw in my life. That was incredible. And the building and all of the fanfare. And maybe that was kind of their coming out party. I don't know. That was incredible. You can't pick up a magazine or newspaper without reading about the emerging power of China. But I believe the best by far is yet to come for China. I have thought about the Chinese space program that includes as a centerpiece landing Chinese on the moon and creating a base. And it's been publicized. It's in the neighborhood of 2020, 2021, somewhere in that vicinity. I have concluded that this is, of course, part of their national vision, but very different from the American lunar program. I have reasoned that China will not just send their takonauts to make footprints and collect dirt. Okay, regolith, but dirt. There would be really no point in China simply repeating what the Americans did. When you have the opportunity for creating a sea change in global power that may only come along in 1,000 years of this magnitude. Since China is already committed to going to the moon, thereby risking national honor, life, and capital in trying to succeed in these efforts, why not take the all-important syllogistic next step? Ownership, ownership, ownership. I believe they will make ownership claims wherever they land and are able to move about. And this process shall continue for years until they have surveyed, marked, and claimed the entire body. Almost brings me to tears. No, some allergies, but I really do believe this. I have thought about this a lot for the last couple of years. The moon and maybe later Mars, we're going to address China's prospects for ownership. 4 issues to consider. If you're going to execute this plan, if you're going to actually achieve this, what stands in your way? What do you have to have? First is motivation. You have to want to really do it, don't you? Why do it? So the questions are, why do it? Is the moon valuable? What would China gain? The second thing you need is how to acquire it. How do you actually execute this? What are the resources? What are the kinds of things that you need to make this happen? The third is what and or who is to prevent this from happening? And you're all comfortable knowing about the 67 Space Treaty. Forget that. It isn't going to save us. Fourth, when might this happen? Let's address the first, motivation. What is there about the moon that is or would be valuable to the Chinese from an ownership position? It's a good place, jumping off place to the rest of the solar system. We've heard that for a long time. Mining and transporting helium-3 to Earth as a new clean power source for perhaps feeding industries for the next 200 to 500 years. The Earth has no indigenous internal supplies. Apparently we collect it from the decay of nuclear warheads, so we have practically none. Some people have estimated that if you had 6 tons of this material, you could supply all the energy needs for the United States for a year. Other folks have estimated that the moon contains somewhere between 1 million and 20 million tons of this stuff. So it's a valuable resource. Imagine having a monopoly on that. Wow. And the reactors, the fusion reactors that produce the energy. Water ice for human consumption. Rocket fuel. Thanks to Tim Pickens, we have a motor system on our spacecraft that runs off of water. Ionize the molecule and pressurize the oxygen and hydrogen and light it. And hopefully you guys are going to get a demonstration of that here. For irrigation and generally the fountain of life. So water is important and it has a indigenous supply. Colonization to save the species. I suppose it's okay if they're all Chinese. Sell or lease tracts of territory on the lunar surface, sell licenses to other countries and corporations that would provide surface power, transportation, provide leasing and licensing rights for research. In other words, from the sheer standpoint of control, and this is a short list, you can have a lot of benefits. But there are 2 really major things that got my attention here. One is the effects upon Chinese national pride and their confidence. It would cause an enormous uplifting of Chinese people everywhere. It would be great to be Chinese. I've already started to really overindulge in my Chinese menu as it is now. So I'm working my way. Americans are still basking in the lunar glow after 40 years, so it's really a powerful achievement to get to the moon, to walk on the moon, but we don't own 1 square foot of the damn place. Not 1 square lousy foot. Yet that power is so magnificent is that after 40 years, it is still recognized by the entire planet. And this leads to the last and final thing that I think is a huge watershed type of event, and is the most significant for the Chinese, most valuable. And that's the global psychological impact. The tsunami of maximizing imperial global image to all nations everywhere. This would endure for a very long time. It's priceless. Countries spend a lot of money and effort and time trying to magnify their size and their position and their supremacy in this world. So, and so can you imagine every hour of every day, everybody on this planet looking at that body and realizing somebody owns it, and it's not them, it's China. I think nothing else that China could possibly do in the next 15 years would be cause as great a benefit for China. I can't think of anything else they could possibly do that would demoralize the confidence of a whole lot of people, at the same time elevate them to a position of eminence. Second thing here is how to acquire ownership. What would China need? You start off with internal financial resources and an international commercial and political influence that has been accumulated and distributed globally sufficient to compromise complaints that could turn into meaningful action. In my own backyard in outside of Las Vegas, there's this little town called Laughlin. And the Chinese are preparing to put in an industrial park, $5 billion industrial park in the middle of Jackrabbit country. And they're going to attach a major solar cell photovoltaic power generating facility there as part of that. It really has everybody's attention in my county. And they have done this globally. You know, they secured all the world's supply practically of rare earths, and Japan was really choked and squeezed over that. And so I think there are two or three plants that were shut down that are now being reactivated in this country to try and reacquire that material. China is very focused on controlling market, on ownership. That's apparent. So we have a few list of things here just to compare things and take stock. China does have a dramatic engine of growth. American growth obviously is a fraction of that. China debt is not a problem. American debt is $15 trillion. We watch that little clock keep on going. China liquidity, they have over $3 trillion in cash. America has no cash. We haven't had any cash for a long time. China is the world's largest importer. China is the world's largest exporter. The only reason I guess General Motors made a net profit was because of the sales in China last year. China is the second largest economy in the world as of early 2010. They beat out Japan. The IMF projects China as number one in GDP in 2016. Number one, GDP in 2016. China holds over 25% of all foreign-held American debt. So the lesson is no bucks, no Buck Rogers. If you have the bucks, you can buy the Buck Rogers. Technological capability, you need to have that. Where is China now, much less in 2022? 2007, Griffin said, Michael Griffin, past administrator of NASA, when we get back to the moon, we will be greeted by the Chinese. And he wasn't joking, he wasn't kidding around, he meant that. China recently adopted a new national philosophy, moving from made in China, and we probably don't realize that this actually was a conscious program, but it was, to a new one, innovated in China. They are very focused on IP, intellectual property, and information technologies, and they're not too finicky, to be frank, about how they go about it. They steal the hell out of things if they can. This is a concern over a lot of us in the commercial area in this country and other countries. So they're very aggressive. They have a different interpretation in their views toward patent rights. Maybe for some folks stealing is overboard, but if you talk to somebody who has lost their company because of this, it's not too strong for him. So modifications could be very cosmetic, and they would claim that they had a new product. But I'm getting off the subject here. In their space program, Chang'e 2, they have a step-by-step process here that's interesting. Chang'e 2 is a lunar probe launched in 2010 to test lunar orbital mapping and soft lunar landings. China built its first stealth fighter bomber. The West hasn't decided yet exactly which it is. In August of 2010, China conducted a very close maneuver of two satellites to allow them to inspect each other at a range of 200 yards. That's good. That's a bit tricky. In 2011, Tiangong 1 was launched, was their first space lab module. In 2013, Chang'e 3 is intended to be the first unmanned lunar landing craft. In 2017, they will execute a lunar sample return mission. What's next? You have to have the ability to stay focused. Does China have that ability? Yeah, they have the reputation for it. They have their 5-year plans. And China is actually pretty famous historically for being able to maintain its focus and stay on point. So you have the actual execution then of reaching the moon, and then what do you do next? Well, you send enough teams and rovers to start the process of surveying, placing markers, and so forth. If you really want to do it in a totally kosher way that's indisputably appropriate in the way of making this kind of claim, that is much more thorough than historically a lot of countries have done in the old days in claiming territory, even in this country. So what or who is to prevent this? Oh, okay, let's talk about the 67 treaty. Favorite, greatest thing. All right. It is the treaty on principles governing the activities of states in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. Article 15 and 16 are really the only relevant articles here. Article 15, any state party to the treaty may propose amendments to this treaty. Amendments shall enter into force upon their acceptance by a majority of the states parties. It's not like the United Nations. You don't have a country that has exclusive veto power like the 5 major countries do in the United Nations. It's a majority controls. So if you are China and you have already purchased huge, vast quantities of land in Brazil and South America, and you have invested tons of money in Africa, and you are employing lots of people and raising the living standards of millions and millions and millions of people, and you're investing money in Laughlin, Nevada, of all places, which most of you in this room I'm sure have never even heard of, and this goes on and on and on and on, you are embedding yourself in the best possible way of winning friends and influencing people, like old Dale Carnegie said. So how many votes do you think the United States would get? How many friends do we have around the world compared to the largest of China, perhaps, even today, much less if they continue this process? Article 16, though, if that failed, Article 16 is really simple and easy. You just do this. Any state party to the treaty may give notice of its withdrawal from the treaty 1 year after its entry into force by written notification to the depository governments. Such withdrawal shall take effect 1 year from the date of receipt of this notification. So they send a letter, and they say, we're not happy. You know, the first effort was simply to modify the treaty in order to remove and obliterate references to ownership of celestial bodies or any of that sort of thing. But you maintain the language to do with not having nuclear missiles in space and in orbit or on, you know, you maintain all the other. The treaty addresses multiple areas. Ownership's only a small one. So first you would try to change that to address only that small area. Failing that, go for it. Send out the damn letter. Give them 12 months notice, and you're out of there. You're a sovereign country. You can do what you want to do. So you send the letter out. Done. What about public opinion? The great public opinion is going to save this situation. Not in the least. No way. There isn't going to be World War III over this. There isn't going to be a single shot fired. How could that possibly be? First of all, they're playing by the rules, aren't they? They're playing by their own, the rules that have been set down and established by essentially everybody over a long period of time. They're going through the traditional process of laying claim and surveying. They played by the rules about extricating themselves from the 67 treaty. So, you know, the public, yes, they're going to be upset, but there's not going to be any going over there and kicking sand in their face. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. So what about the United States or a consortium of other countries? Well, I've got here in my little parentheses, too little, too late. There's no way in the world, this is on the radar screen of any congressman or political official in this country. In fact, right now they only have their focus on one thing, which we understand is about 75% of the time is what they have their focus on. So it's below the radar, and I think this is something that we would only recognize far too late in the process. When might this happen? I'm going to predict somewhere around 2022, 2026, somewhere in that time frame. Again, my theory is, looking at the behavior of China, looking at their history, looking at the preparations they're making and the advancements and the wherewithal they have, I'm connecting the dots. That's all I'm doing is connecting the dots here. Of course, Mars would likely be next as a Chinese target, maybe in late 2020s. What I'm going to suggest is that if China proceeds to lay ownership claims to vast territories of the moon, this will hopefully produce the fear factor necessary to motivate the Americans. Maybe. It may and probably will be much too late for the Americans to respond to China securing the moon. However, Mars would likely still be available. With a landmass of Earth, Mars is special in many ways. But how would America be able to pay for such a competition? And with NASA having such a poor track record of performance for the last 30 years of completing programs on time and on budget, who would be in charge of getting the work done? I don't have an answer to this last question, but I do have an approach to the first. I foresee the possibility of a unique situation. What if the American government found that military spending could safely decline by 10% in real dollars, while at the same time increasing spending on defending America's chance to own portions of Mars? Current American defense spending, not including black budgets, is over $600 billion per year. If that 10% reduction in defense spending were given to a Mars ownership space program, that would create an additional $60 billion per year as an increase to the space budget. The current military trend is away from wars costing massive loss of life and injuries, but wars still cost massive amounts of money. The future military trend is to do both. Reduce the loss of life and injuries while also reducing the insane financial costs of wars. For example, $2 trillion for the Iraq and Afghanistan wars has already been spent. The American public is so disgusted with the cost of these two wars that this bad taste will probably linger for 10 to 15 years once those wars are over. If money for defense could be reduced by 10%, a comparable increase in space expenditures could be a good substitute for this 10% reduction to feed the military-industrial complex. So what happens when this money is transferred and reallocated? 1, a Mars Quest for Ownership program will produce less loss of life and injuries as compared to that of those same 10% defense dollars engaged in wars that it would be hard to even measure. 2, small and large companies that profit from war and the making of war materials with an aerospace manufacturing capability could shift from one to the other. Those boards of directors couldn't care less so long as the total contracts remain equal or greater. That's the fact of business. 3, science and human knowledge would experience a quantum jump. Finally, 4, after 40 years, America would finally have a new vision, again supported by fear, this time from China. Acquiring a Mars presence and securing territories of ownership will take a number of years, even if we are pushed by China. These large expenditures continuing for many years will provide an equal economic substitute for the reduced economic stimulus from lower war production budgets. In addition, this would soon produce the creation of an important economic dynamic. When we landed on the moon, then left only footprints, no commerce was possible. With Mars under ownership, development and commerce would produce a nexus for multiple new industries. America would experience a rebirth in vision that we haven't had since landing on the moon, excitement, science, prosperity, and global prestige. America might just achieve something that would be worthy of respect from that generation of Americans known as the greatest generation. Thank you. Left? Okay.
You bet you do.
Anybody has a question?
I got them. I'm ready.
Yeah, it did. It did.
So, Bob, your first question is, if Chinese lunar supremacy is a concern, I'm over here. Hello. If Chinese lunar supremacy is a concern, why not cooperate? It's a case of keeping friends close and enemies closer. They can't claim sole ownership on joint ventures.
If they would go for it, I think that would be a great idea. If they would go for it, a piece of something is better than a piece of nothing. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Your next question is, the moon may have many potential resources, but will the cost of making them available to Earthlings make them unaffordable?
That's a function of changing the dynamic of cost relative to the transportation factor and the ability to continue a perpetual existence on the surface. And then it's also a dynamic of just how much of a benefit you feel in dollars. If you were to take the moon and put it into a private corporation, you couldn't express that value in the context of trillions. It would be in a quadrillion kind of mode. That's the potential value that something like that has. Not just from an indigenous organic supply of helium-3 or something else, but again, getting back to that psychological impact. That impact is brutal. It's going to be horrible.
So the moon appears to have great economic potential for the U.S. in terms of material resources. What do you see are the economic potentials for Mars?
I'm sorry, repeat that again, please.
So the moon appears to have great economic potential for the U.S. in terms of resources. What economic potential is there in Mars?
I think the majority of those potentials is gained in the process. It's gained along the path of trying to get there, of trying to do something. Maybe it's gained in, first of all, trying to explore nuclear propulsion and superheating fuels. I wonder, after all these years and decades, why are we still using fire engines to get to space? Why are we using something that still breathes fire, puts out heat? So we're handcuffed, it looks like, for a time. We haven't evolved and developed some anti-gravitational kind of machine or technology. But so long as we are still connected to these fire engines, then we need to find better and better ways to maximize the efficiency. So you get a lot of spin-offs of things that you try to do along the path of trying to actually cause habitation of that body. There are going to be 100,000 different kinds of ancillary kind of benefits from that kind of an effort. I've been a big fan of microgravity research that we really haven't done enough of. Because I think if you had really large, robust microgravity facilities in space, you would have a chance to discover something that a species who was only earthbound would have. I think the same thing kind of applies in this. If you're trying to reach out and get to other bodies, then you're going to stumble upon some discoveries that you hadn't anticipated.
Little switch gears here. How has the economic downturn affected Bigelow Aerospace?
We have downsized our company to correspond to what we perceive as the progress and pace of essentially everyone else, and to recognize this recession has caused a stall in the appetite of our own customers. And so we said, well, why be in the year 2022, or why be in the year 2014 with 2 of our large spacecraft ready to launch and fly, and we don't have transportation and our clients aren't ready? So we backed off. We figured, what's the hurry? What's the rush? We might as well back off. And our schedule, we can reacquire a schedule which would be a function of adding the time from now to whenever we reasserted ourselves that time frame would be tacked on to the 2014 time frame for having those 2 spacecraft ready.
Question from Twitter. Is it really credible that somehow China would subvert international space law with lunar property rights?
Well, they wouldn't subvert the law. I mean, if I were advising anybody to do it, I'd say, pay attention to the law. Do it in a legal way. Why not? It's there for you. Go ahead and send in the notification and withdraw if you can't get it overturned through a majority vote. Nobody is suggesting violating the law. That's not necessary.
could private citizens try claiming the moon or Mars?
I think the only really valid way of laying such a claim is to have a presence and to actually execute the monuments and cadastrals and locations of markers and establish the fact that you've been there and done that, and then connect those points into claiming this is an area that we're patenting and that area we own.
One last question. How long do you think it'll be until we see ITAR-free commercial human spaceflight companies emerging to vie for market share? You know, MTCR guy, right? They have to get the ITAR question, so.
The problem is if it doesn't happen here, it's going to happen outside the United States, and in the final end of the day, it isn't going to be that progress is going to stop. The issue is, where is the progress going to come from? Who's going to do it? So if we choke ourselves, it isn't going to happen here. It could happen overnight. If our government wanted to reestablish some new rules and protect things that obviously need protecting, and release for example, the suborbital folks from that kind of burden, it's ridiculous that they have that burden.
So please join me in thanking Bob Bigelow for this very frank and
Thank you.
honest conversation.